Which quarterback gives the New Orleans Saints the best chance to win? Ladies and gentlemen, the backdrop is Mike Triplett, Nick Underhill of New Orleans Football. They are live from Indianapolis at the Scouting Combine. The NFL Draft, the Combine is all happening. They are there in a lobby talking about the Whodats. So we're going to go ahead and listen and react along the way.
Our agency. I mean, the fact of the matter is, though, and we've been saying this, like, I think the path forward, if you allow me to kind of go blank slate, no ramifications, no locker room blowback, the path forward for me that I want to see him take is something new, clean, lead you to a younger quarterback, someone that's part of like the ultimate rebuild that, you know, becomes a building block of your team. Obviously you want that path, and if you aren't finding it, I want them to be bad enough to find an answer to it. The problem with that is always you might not draft the right guy. You might end up getting Anthony Richardson, and he's not an answer. So it's a very hard thing to find your way out of. The reality of the situation is you have Derek.
Okay, so this is obviously, the context of this is obviously in the news of Derek Carr returning as Saints quarterback. So the options for the Saints, like the realistic options, Spencer Rattler, Derek Carr, drafting a quarterback. That's where you're at. You ain't drafting a quarterback at 9, okay? So, like, are you drafting a 4th round, 5th round quarterback, and that's your answer? Are you going with Spencer Rattler? Is that your answer? And then, of course, you have the Derek Carr situation. Now, the most misnomer, fugazi thing of all time is twofold. One is the idea of tanking. 2 is the idea of be bad enough to draft a quarterback, and then you'll start winning. Guys, I understand that you can get the diamond in the rough. I understand you can get the Joe Burrows of the world and whoever, but how many more drafts do we need for everyone to see that drafting a quarterback in the top 10, top 5, number 1 overall doesn't mean anything if the infrastructure is not there? Trevor Lawrence is sitting in Jacksonville. 1st overall, generational prospect, can't miss. Look at Jacksonville. Joe Burrow, 1st overall, as good of a 1st overall as you can possibly ask for. And they've been 9-8 the last 2 seasons. I understand they went to a Super Bowl. 9-8 the last 2 seasons. Okay? It is really, 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 really hard to win in the NFL. It's really hard to nail the draft pick. It's really hard to do all that. Why do you think the same bad teams have been bad and are bad? Like, if it was that easy, a team would just be bad for a year and they'd be good. And that would be it. Teams would just go up and down and up and down and up and down. And then, how do you explain the teams that are consistently good but don't draft in the top 15? It's a paradox, right? The NFL has to sell the draft. They have to sell draft picks. They have to sell the combine and prop it up so that people watch. Because of that, after years and years and years and years of that, we have fans who believe that all you need is a top 10 draft pick. And then boom, you get a top 10 draft pick, you get your quarterback, they're guaranteed to succeed. Meanwhile, we've got Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Trey Lance, Justin Fields, Blake Bortles, Blaine Gabbert. I mean, the list can go on and on and on and on. Even Andrew Luck, the great and holy Andrew Luck that everyone loves to talk about as the greatest draft prospect of all time, the greatest number 1 overall pick of all time. What did that do for Indy? Nothing.
Derek Carr, you have Spencer Rattler, you have Jake Haener. If you're Kellen Moore, you're coming into a situation and you're trying to win games, and everything else aside, there is obviously one guy that gives you the best chance to win a game tomorrow, and it's Carr. And people don't want to hear that, but the reality of the situation is he is the most talented quarterback on this team. Yeah. And, like, I understand that decision as well, but...
You know what's another interesting part? Nick just kind of pseudo brought it up. If you think about it from Kellen Moore's standpoint, like, all right, Kellen, you can choose Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, or Jake Haener. Kellen Moore wasn't here last year. So all this, like, Derek Carr, you know, if he's not a locker room guy or people don't like him or the interviews or the this or the that, like all that stuff that the fans who cover the team and talk about the team and think about the team 24/7, and the subreddits and whatever, the stuff that we're holding over Derek Carr's head, Kellen Moore, 1, doesn't know about, 2, could care less about, right? If he's just given those 3 options, it's a split. It's an absolute, like, boop, easiest decision of his life. Easiest decision of his life is like, hey, man, who do you want to start the season with? Carr, Rattler, or Haener? I mean, they probably wouldn't even offer the Haener option, but of course he's going to say Carr. So throw in the fact that it financially seems to make sense. No brainer.
I just need to see if you're doing this, that it's a patch and you're still looking for a way
that's what
over
I've been
here.
saying.
And, unfortunately, I do think the best way to get over here is just to go over here. Like, I don't think it's living over here and trying to find a way to make the 2 paths connect.
Yeah.
We've seen it kind of happen, forever. Some teams get lucky and they find they go from one to the other and they keep going, but it's very hard to do it by design. But the reality is getting over here, once you're over here, you might not ever find a way to, actually get your car moving on that road. And
yes. Nick just made 14 great points in a row right there. Point number 1, the idea of like, okay, well, it's kind of what we talked about in the first little bit here, but it's like, all right, you're here, just get to here as fast as possible, which is like the next era or whatever, the next chapter. But in reality, it's not that simple. Sometimes teams go from relevancy to bad or rebuilding, and they never get out of that. They just sit in that for 10, 15 years. You ever heard of the Raiders? So it's not just like, all right, you just do this and this and this, and then you rebuild, and then you reset, and then 20 years later you do it again. Like, every team is not the Packers, where you just happen to run into, Brett Favre, Aaron Rodgers, and Jordan Love. Now, the book's still out on Jordan Love. So that's one of those, like, yeah, it seems good, sounds good. If you could push that reset button and just get all these new players and they're all good and we're set, new roster and all that, then yeah, but unfortunately that's just not really how it works.
It's impossible. Like, finding a quarterback can be an impossible thing. I mean, honestly, going right back to the Colts, like, since Andrew Luck is retired, they're a great example of it. It's kind of time situation, get really bad, draft Anthony Richardson, still screwed, looking for a temp situation, and it might take them another 10 years to find their way out of it. You just never really know. So, like, I get the reluctance to kind of just go over here. I think it's easy for me, the people in the YouTube comments, for you, for everybody to say, like, no, I want to go over here and explore this until you're over here. Like, at the end of the Drew Brees thing, it was, I'm ready for something else. Well, this is something else. You know what I mean? Like, it's very easy to say, I want to go this direction until you're over there. So I can sit here and scream it from the blue moon or whatever the phrase is. But, like, I also understand there's logic to, like, we're going to play it out this way and kind of keep trying to figure it out, because, like, this guy isn't the worst quarterback in the NFL.
Well, here's what Derek Carr is. This is, sometimes the comments that.
Okay, the other thing Nick said, the other point before we get to Mike's point, I don't want to lose it, but he's saying, like, if this decision is the decision, which it is, and then it still means we're getting younger, it still means we're trying to offload these contracts, it still means we're trying to fix the finances, it still means we're trying to, build through the draft to get a younger roster and deal with Cam Jordan and Taysom Hill and some of these other, like, that's okay, like, fine. If there's 10 decisions to be made, and the car decision is the most impossible of decisions to make, if we don't make that one, but we make the other ones, okay. Now if we don't release Carr, we don't release Taysom, and we restructure Cam Jordan, and we still have him, and we don't get younger, and we don't get impact players in the draft, then you sit back and you're like, well, hold on a second, this is not it. This is absolutely not it. But if Taysom's contract goes and we trade Cam or release Cam or whatever, and then we draft Mason Graham, I'm just gonna mix that up. We draft Mason Graham, and then he's an absolute superstar in the defensive line, and we draft Savion Williams, and he's a good looking wide receiver and and all that. Then okay, I can see what's going on here. They are not mutually exclusive, where you either release Carr and get younger, clear the cap and all that, or you don't, release Carr, and you don't get younger and clear the cap and try and get your finances straight. So as long as the long-term thing is still happening, I'm okay with if we have to deal with this for another year.
That are so abundant can kind of help shape. I think there's a debate over whether Derek Carr is good or whether he's bad, but his record as the Saints starter, even in these bad years with all these injuries and Dennis Allen, the coach, is 14-13. Even that is polarizing. I have seen so many people be like, the guy's not a winner. He's 14-13. And then someone else might be like, he's 14-13 with this kind of pile of trash that he's had to work with. I think 14-13 is a perfect description of what Derek Carr is. Like, that's not even an opinion. Like, he's a 14-13 quarterback. So that's your debate is, if that's not good enough for you, you don't want Derek Carr. The Saints are like, that gives me a fighting chance. 14-13 could be 16-11 pretty easily if our luck changes. 16-11 would be great. So, like, that's not even an opinion on Derek Carr. I think he is a 14-13 quarterback. So the question is, what, do you hate that? I totally understand that a lot of people.
But okay, what I've been saying is that if you do hate that, well, what's the other option? Like, if you hate 14-13 and you hate being a 9-win, 10-win, 8-win team somewhere in there, if you hate that, you are really going to hate being a 5-win team. You are really going to hate rocking and rolling with Spencer Rattler or Jackson Dart or Kyle McCord or Jalen Milroe or Jake Haener, LOL, and winning 4 or 5 games, 3 games. But James, if we win 3 or 4 or 5 games and we get a high draft pick and we can be good, were you asleep? Were you asleep during the first half of this video? Okay? Go here, YouTube Blake Bortles highlights. And when you're done watching that 20-second video, YouTube Blaine Gabbert highlights. And when you're done watching that 10-second video, YouTube Justin Field highlights. And then Zach Wilson highlights. And then Trey Lance highlights. And then in 2 minutes after you watch all of those videos of their very small highlights, get back to me.
I hate that. A lot of people everybody wants to find their Joe Burrow. Like, nobody wants to nobody wants to settle for 14-13.
It's horrible.
But that's what Derek Carr is. He's a
Okay. I mean, Mike just walked right into my spider's web. You get to Joe Burrow. Then you go 9-8 back-to-back years. Then what the hell do you do? And now you're firing your DC. And now you're having trouble paying your wide receiver. And now you're having to franchise tag your wide receiver just to try and keep some people together in order to try and win. What then? It ain't all sunshines and rainbows, ladies and gentlemen.
14-13 quarterback. And the Saints want to keep the 14-13 quarterback and hope that, he is 2 wins away from being 16-11. I mean, how many games has he, by his own default, not been able to make that one last play at the end of the game, where the Eagles made one last play at the end of the game? Like, so it's very interesting to me that there's even people that use that as their argument. The guy's not a winner, he's 14-13. He is a 14-13 quarterback. That's what he is.
That's what he's been. Yeah, and look,
and they're okay with that. I don't necessarily agree, but like that's.
I don't agree with that part either. I don't think the Saints are inherently okay with being 14-13. I think they've made some decisions, and they're in like for example, okay, when you go on these ebbs and flows in the NFL or in sports in general, you get to situations where either your players are getting old or there's injuries or you have busts or whatever, and you got to work through that. It's all about pivoting and problem solving, and it's not as simple as, well, we want to be a 12-win team. Every team can't be a 12-win team. All right, so now you got whatever the situation is, you have to get out of it, and you have to pivot out of it. All right, so the Saints don't want to be a 7-win, 8-win, 9-win team. That's where they're at right now. A lot of the roster is getting older. A lot of the roster was injured. Some of the roster was retiring. A lot was happening. So now what the Saints do always do is they say, we are okay with being 7, 8, 9 wins while we get this straight for a year or 2 years, but we ain't going to be that bad, and we're going to try and jump right back into relevancy. All right? That's the deal. Remember, they didn't sign Derek Carr yesterday. I know the news broke yesterday, but they didn't sign Derek Carr yesterday. They signed him 2 years ago. Now they're having to deal with it. When they signed him, they weren't forecasting Dennis Allen being fired. They weren't forecasting Pete Carmichael being fired. They weren't forecasting Taysom Hill blowing his leg apart. They weren't forecasting DeMario Davis kind of taking a step back. They weren't forecasting trading Marshawn Lattimore. They weren't forecasting Eric McCoy's injuries and everybody's injuries. But it's happened. So how do you pivot? How do you deal with it? How do you build for the future? That's what the Saints are doing. So the idea that they're just happy to be an 8-win team, 9-win team, out of the entire NFL over the last 20 years, the Saints are one of the teams that are the least okay with being a 7-win, 8-win, 9-win team.
I don't know. I don't know that I would say they're okay with it, but they feel like you can. They think they can inflate it.
Yeah.
They think they can put some wind underneath it and inflate it a little bit. And that was, you mentioned it earlier. My biggest criticism of the Derek Carr era is that they got Derek Carr and they said, take us somewhere. And it's like, no, you put Derek in the passenger seat and you kind of got to put all these people around him and say, like, we can get there with him in the car. And that's how it can work. We're going to hit a quick break and keep talking right after this.
All right.
Welcome back to.
There you go. Okay. Yeah, I mean, listen. We've talked about this at length over the last couple of days. It's going to be a talking point. It is what it is. I know it's polarizing, but I think the more we talk through it, the faster we get there, faster we get where we got to go. You know what I'm saying, ladies and gentlemen? All right. Going down to the comments below. Let me know what you think. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next video.